Number 5, the camouflage cloud. Alright, truth seekers, our first clip up today comes to us from Instagram, and I know, but hear me out first before you discredit it and watch this clip and then tell me what you think. User the UFO God, and look, maybe it's just the name, but I'm inclined to trust them, posted this video recently, and it's been illuminating. In the video, we can see something in the clouds moving, or rather, the clouds themselves moving in a way that almost makes it seem alive. If anyone out there seen Jordan Peele's Nope, that's the first thing that I thought to watching this clip, and mostly why I wanted to include it in this video. It brings up an interesting thing to consider. We tend to only think of UFO sightings as little black boxes zipping up through the sky carrying passengers from another world, but what if the UFO sighting was the alien itself? You know what I mean? You follow along? An organic, non-humanoid entity capable of changing shape in ways that our little primitive human brains just couldn't comprehend. Look, I know I'm mostly summarizing the plot of Jordan Peele's brilliant Nope here, but it's an interesting thing to crunch on, and when you're watching this clip, it's hard to think of anything else. I mean, look at the way the cloud moves. It definitely doesn't look like any cloud I've ever seen. And what is there to suggest that extraterrestrial life will fit in neatly into our idea of what they should look like? I mean, we think of flying saucers just because that's what pop culture tells us, but it could be anything, really. There's also the possibility that whatever we're looking at is some incredibly advanced cloaking technology masking a craft. I mean, invisibility cloaking isn't as sci-fi as you think. Prototypes for cloaks are being developed by militaries around the world today. Let me know what you think of this footage down below in the comments, because it had me scratching my head and rubbing my chin, making all kinds of hms and ha's. And if you like what we're doing here and you want to see more UFO content and wild speculation, well, I have got some great news for you, my viewer. I've got loads of UFO videos and I've got tons of vague speculating from yours truly. All you gotta do is hit subscribe. Number 4, Area 51. Our next clip comes to us from Nevada, specifically near Groom Lake. If you're not super familiar with the geography of Nevada, and why would you be unless you're from there, if I told you that Area 51 is located right on top of Groom Lake, would that catch your attention a little bit? You know, the top secret government black site that technically doesn't exist. The infamous base said to be home to all manner of extraterrestrial activity. That's enough run up, I think. Let's check out the clip. Now, anything coming out of Area 51 is already pretty suspect. But this is really weird. In the video, we can see a series of flying lights hovering high above the desert dunes. Bright lights in the desert sky is one thing, but in the video, we see what looks like them forming together. A series of lights merges together to become one larger one flying around. So what could it possibly be? Drones flying around? Voltron? Now, drones seems like it would be the most likely answer if it was anywhere other than Area 51. I'm just saying. Whatever's happening here has to be a top secret. Could this be experiments with technology recovered from beyond the stars? Now, there are countless conspiracies surrounding Area 51, but one of the most recurring and popular ones is that it's where UFO technology is stored and reverse engineered to develop new technology and systems for the US military. Perhaps even pilots could be trained to fly alien craft. Whatever's going on here, the likelihood of us ever finding out is next to impossible. If you've seen our video on Area 51 secrets, you know that they keep everything wrapped tight as a knot down there. Nothing they don't want you to see is making it out of that base. That won't stop us from trying to get a good look. Number 3, bizarre light patterns. Now, our next sighting comes to us from the stars themselves, specifically during a live stream of the ISS, the International Space Station for the uninitiated. The stream is simple enough, a live stream view out of a porthole of the space station, offering a round-the-clock look at the stars. It's relaxing and fascinating, and I recommend you check it out. But it's also a window of opportunity into a world of unexplained phenomena. One astute viewer was watching the stream late at night when they saw something incredibly bizarre. Watch the footage, I think you'll know exactly what I mean. We can see a cluster of lights moving bizarrely across the screen in a pattern all in unison together. Now, this camera is pointed downwards towards the Earth, so some commenters have suggested that possibly what we could be seeing is intense lights shining up from the Earth herself onto the night sky. And while the realist in me can see where they're coming from here, the paranormal investigator in me is fascinated by the possibility that maybe, just maybe, this is something a little bigger than a weird light pattern. Maybe someone in the comments who knows more about lights and stars can help me out with this, but to me, this cluster of lights moving seems like it's something, man, you know? Could this be another example of extraterrestrial cloaking technology? It's far from the first time astronauts have reported seeing strange things up and around the ISS. I have to imagine the International Space Station is probably a hot spot for extraterrestrial activity. I mean, aliens coming to Earth is one thing, that's on our territory, but our big station up in the stars, That's their neighborhood. That's their backyard we put that up in. I'm sure they want to come out and see what that's all about. I wonder if aliens see it as like a funny little tourist destination to check out. Take some photos with. Who knows? Number 2. Lieutenant Gorman's UFO dogfight. Now, not much happens in North Dakota. Fargo is probably a lot more known as a Coen Brothers movie and a slept-on FX series than it is known as a town where anything of note happens. Unless, of course, you count the occasional UFO sighting. In October of 1948, Lieutenant George Gorman of the North Dakota National Guard would make history and inspire theories for decades when he claims he got into a dogfight with an alien craft. He was flying above the town of Fargo, North Dakota, when he saw what looked like an aircraft about 500 feet below him. He radioed into air traffic to try and ascertain what it was he was looking at, and was shocked to hear back from Mission Control, who told him, well, there shouldn't be any other planes in that area. Naturally, Gorman flew in to investigate. He reported that it was a tiny object, some 6 to 8 inches in diameter, blinding white and completely round, blinking on and off. He says that as he approached this strange bright object, it charged towards him. He pursued it as best he could, but when it looked as if the object was going to crash into him, it shot upwards at a 90-degree angle. He attempted to pursue it, chasing it 14,000 feet into the air, only for it to disappear inexplicably at that mark. Later that night, the air traffic control tower reported seeing that exact same bizarre light at the airfield. Gorman touched down and told his superior officers that he had no idea what it was he encountered, but that he had reason to believe that whatever he was pursuing had thought behind its movements, that it seemed to be making decisions, conscientious choices, and it was reacting to what he was doing. Lieutenant Gorman would live out the rest of his days fairly normally, but no doubt in the back of his mind, he must have always wondered just what it was he encountered that fateful night. Number 1. Tic Tac sighting. If you're a UFO enthusiast, you probably already knew about this, but I'll never stop banging on about this because it's the craziest thing that's happened in years. The Pentagon publicly revealed that they've been tracking UFO development for years, putting some serious weight into the UFO discussion. Besides doing more to legitimize UFO discussion than anything else, like ever, it also provided us with a bevy of sightings from government agents to pull from. In 2004, a pair of Navy pilots tracked a series of UFOs for weeks on end. According to their reports, these objects would appear suddenly at about 80,000 feet in the air and then descend rapidly towards the Pacific Ocean, eventually stopping at around 20,000 feet and just hovering. They would either drop out of radar range or shoot right back up into the sky, which is pretty bizarre behavior. These entities were monitored for weeks before 2 fighter jet pilots were officially sent in to investigate the phenomena. Commander David Fravor and Lieutenant Commander Jim Slight, who flew out to try and get eyes on it. What they found would confound the veterans. The men reported back that the object resembled a giant Tic Tac, an unidentifiable white-colored oval-like aircraft about 40 feet long. Far, far too big to be a drone, and doesn't really sound like any aircraft I've ever heard of. The craft was jumping around erratically, staying just out of reach of radars, but not moving in any one particular direction. The pilots agreed on a rendezvous point to touch down and discuss whatever it was they had just seen, but as they were heading towards it, the UFO flew towards their rendezvous point at a breakneck speed before disappearing entirely. Commander David Fravor said it was unlike anything he had ever seen before, and the whole experience had weirded him out. Completely understandable. I think if I ever saw a giant Tic Tac spiraling erratically through the air, it would kind of affect me too. So what do you think? Any ideas at all? Because that sounds like pretty hard proof of a UFO.
Number 5. The spook light. In the early 1830s, when the Native Americans were put on their forced march during the Trail of Tears, some of them reported seeing something unusual while near Missouri and Oklahoma's border. Something that has remained a consistent part of American folklore and a relatively commonly reported sight ever since. While the Native Americans were passing through an area known as the Devil's Promenade, they apparently saw a glowing orb of light that was floating in the distance. Sometimes it's reported as being the size of a baseball, and other times as being the size of a basketball. Sometimes it remains stationary as it hovers in the night, and sometimes it appears to vibrate and twitch in the air. Explanations have included tales of 2 Native American lovers searching for each other in the night, the ghost of a Confederate soldier, and even the devil himself wandering the earth with a lantern. It has gone by many names, such as the Joplin Spooklight, the Hornet Spooklight, the Hollis Light, and the Devil's Jack-o'-lantern. The site of the Spooklight has become somewhat of a tourist attraction, with the area being especially popular around Halloween. But though scientists have speculated that it could be the result of a natural gas leak or car lights reflecting off a nearby river, this does not explain the dozens of sightings that occurred before the invention of the automobile. What if the cause of this floating orb is not the spirit of some lost soul trying to find their way home, but the manifestation of extraterrestrial activity? We've all heard plenty of stories of glowing orbs in the sky that have gotten closer and turned out to be starships from outer space. The spook light could perhaps actually be one of these unidentified flying objects. If you subscribe to the theory that aliens have not made direct contact with us because they are studying our species, it would make sense that this light would first appear during a major historical event where millions of displaced native peoples were forced into long marches. Perhaps the sightings since then have been follow-up studies of the area by aliens. If that is the case, and aliens were observing Earth during the Trail of Tears, let's hope they don't judge us for some of our most shameful behavior. Number 4. Funnel ghosts. Tell me if this tale sounds familiar. A couple moves into an old house. It's a bit of a fixer-upper, but they believe they can put in the work and make it a home. They live there for a while, but when night falls, they take a photo and see something they don't expect. Not the typical idea of a ghost where the spirit looks like a past human, perhaps with a transparent appearance, but what is known as a funnel ghost. These spirits are often described as being swirling wisps or spirals of light that often appear in photos or videos, with little to no explanation. Often, when these funnel ghosts are seen, they are believed to be past loved ones or former residents of the home come back to say hello. But maybe these wisps are really visitors from another planet. If aliens are real, they clearly do their best to remain as hidden as possible from humanity. This would explain why UFO sightings are rarely reported in crowded, well-lit areas, and why they don't tend to be active on social media. Despite alien abduction stories where people are taken away to be studied and probed by our alien visitors, if you really wanted to study humans, it would be much more informative to study them in their natural environments. Obviously, little green men running around your home and watching you while you and your family eat would be suspicious. So maybe they've developed a way to hide in plain sight. An advanced species capable of interstellar travel and with spacecraft that are rarely seen by human eyes and hardly ever captured with any clarity on film could be using some kind of technology that reflects ambient light in order to keep them invisible. If we assume this technology is used to hide their ships, it is not unreasonable to hypothesize that this technology could be available for aliens on the ground. The strange shapes appearing in photos that we assume are ghosts are actually aliens studying us in our own homes, using a cloaking device to remain undetected and only being seen when a camera picks up their telltale shimmer. Number 3. Sightings at the West Point Lighthouse in PEI. When it comes to lists of spooky and probably haunted locations, lighthouses are surely near the top of the list, just under murder houses, ancient manors, and abandoned mental hospitals. Such is the case for our next entry. A lighthouse on the west point of the Canadian province of Prince Edward Island. The lighthouse was built in 1876, being passed from keeper to keeper until the operation was automated in 1963. The lighthouse was renovated into an inn, museum, craft shop, and chowder kitchen in the mid-1980s, and has been the source of tales of the supernatural ever since. Visitors often report rather stereotypical ghost activity, such as lights turning on and off, disembodied voices, and cold spots, sending a shiver up guests' spines. More interesting for the purposes of this list are the tales of a ghostly burning ship being seen in the nearby Northumberland Strait. Legend says that at night, sometimes if you look out to sea, you can see a centuries-old ship whose crew were killed when their ship caught fire and sank. According to the tale, they made a deal with the devil in order to save themselves, and as a result are damned to burn on the ship for all of eternity. From the distance that the people who reported this burning ship would be from the boat, they wouldn't be able to make out with much detail on the apparition, especially at night when the ship appears in the vast majority of reported sightings. So, all they would really be seeing is a large, bright, flickering light coming towards the lighthouse that, through the context of the situation, they would assume was a ship. But it makes me think, there are so many stories of UFOs appearing as bright, shining, flickering lights that disappear just as soon as they appear. What if this burning ghost ship is actually an alien craft signaling with its lights? You may think, why would an alien ship be signaling anyone? But look at the situation from their perspective. You're flying around in your flying saucer above the waters of Canada. You see another bright floating light in the distance. You signal to let it know you are there, and when you get close enough to realize that it is not another alien craft, but a tower with a bright light on it that the humans have built on the cliffside, you realize and turn out your lights, causing your ship to seem to suddenly disappear to any humans who saw you. It might very well be a ghost ship, but the fact that it is so close to what would look like a floating light to the uninitiated makes me think this is just as likely. Number 2. Things moving on their own. Another common type of ghost is the alleged poltergeist. They are the type of spirit who enjoys their afterlife by messing around in your home with the intention of scaring you and causing as much property damage as possible. A common way these spirits apparently make their presence known is by moving objects and making them float through the air. Like when you hear a noise at night and go into the kitchen to investigate, only to find your mother's best china floating through the air before it suddenly drops to the floor, leaving you with one less token of remembrance to honor your loved ones with. But maybe this is not the work of a malevolent spirit, but simply a side effect of passing alien ships. When looking at various UFO sightings from across the world, some commonalities begin to emerge. The craft in question are often bright, shining lights against the dark night sky. They tend to appear and disappear just as quickly, and they often seem to be hovering or flying, seemingly on their own, with no visible means of propulsion. Or at least, none that we can see. Perhaps these alien craft are not flying with the use of rockets, but by manipulating gravity. If these ships are able to do this, they could use this to take away gravity under their ship, allowing it to hover or fly through the night. Something like this could affect the houses below it in a similar way that houses located near airports can have their contents rattled by passing planes. Perhaps when alien craft are negating gravity and flying overhead, they are unintentionally affecting gravity in the homes below them, causing things to float and move, not because of spirits, but because of gravity being manipulated. And once the ship has passed, the objects drop, making it seem like an evil spirit has destroyed these lighter objects out of spite for the homeowner. This would mean that people who are dealing with consistent ghost activity were actually just unlucky enough to be directly below an alien's commute. Number 1. Ghostly figures of the past. Everyone has heard some variation of a ghost story like this. You go into an old building that is hundreds of years old. At first, everything seems normal, when suddenly goosebumps break out across your flesh as a chill runs up your spine. You turn and see something you don't expect. A figure from the distant past stands before you. Perhaps it is a soldier from the 1930s, and perhaps it is a small Victorian child in one of those weird little sailor outfits. You try to stammer out some words of greeting, but before you can, they have disappeared before your very eyes. Stories like this are very common in ghost sightings, and can take place anywhere from an old Victorian mansion, a field where an important battle was fought, or even in your own home. You may think that something like this would scream ghost and nothing else. But what if these haunting apparitions are just a side effect of extraterrestrial travel? When considering the possibility of alien visitors, we must ask the question of how they got to our planet in the first place. Even if their craft were capable of reaching light speed, they would take hundreds of years to reach our planet, which hardly seems worth it if assuming these beings have a comparable lifespan to humans. Perhaps they could cryogenically freeze themselves to make the journey more manageable, but that would still make getting to and from the planet a real hassle. Or perhaps these alien beings are capable of faster than light travel, which our concept of science says is impossible. Maybe the answer isn't that these aliens are moving fast. Maybe the answer is that they are bending space and time to reach their destination. If these beings were capable of traveling across the fourth dimension and bending space and time around or folding it in on itself, then it is reasonable to hypothesize that there would be some unintended side effects. One theory of how time works is that all of it is happening at once. So, if a place, say a spooky mansion, were occupied by a small Victorian child in one point of time, and say Ryan Reynolds in another, maybe time folding in on itself to accommodate alien travel would cause us to be able to catch glimpses into the other points in time. So, this hypothetical Ryan Reynolds would see the child from the past and assume it was a ghost. And who knows, maybe the child would see Ryan and assume he is a handsome spirit from the future.
Number 5, the Allagash abduction. Our first tale is known as the Allagash abduction. And by the way, what a turn of a phrase. That sounds like a great airplane book. Named after the Allagash Waterway in Maine, where it took place. In 1976, a group of 4 friends, who'd all met in college, were taking a trip camping, canoeing, and relaxing. The trip would be a trip they would never forget, and not just because of the salmon. The men, twin brothers Jack and Jim, and friends Chuck and Charlie, all decided to go out fishing on the lake at night. Before setting off, though, they made sure to light a large campfire to act as a visible landmark from the water. Now, the evening transpired fairly normally, fishing, sharing stories, until the men saw a blinding light in the sky above them. A glowing orb that shone brighter than any light any of the men had ever seen, flashing all sorts of bright, radiant colors. Now, the object was hard to make out, but it looked to be about 80 meters in diameter, and was slowly approaching the fishing boat. The men hurriedly panicked and paddled back to the shoreline, only to discover that the campfire they had been lit had been completely smoldered and looked to have been put out hours and hours ago, despite the men having not been out nearly that long. Stranger still, a few days after the trip, the men all started reporting similar nightmares, seeing a silver operating room and long, tall, giant-headed creatures examining them in this room, taking samples of their blood, their skin, and so on. All of them described the room, the creatures, and the nightmares extremely similarly. The men underwent psychiatric evaluation and were all deemed mentally stable, even passing polygraph tests. So what happened? Could this have been a mass hallucination? Or were these men plucked by visitors from another world for study? And if you love UFO stories and alien abduction stories, we've got plenty more where that came from at Top 5 Scary. So toss a subscribe and creep on creeping on. Number 4, the mysterious man. Our next story comes to us from the internet's campfire, Reddit. A thread was posted asking abductees, or people who've got an abduction story to share their experience. Now the whole thing is really a highlight, but this one stood out for me. Take a listen, because this anonymous Redditor shared a truly unforgettable, strange experience. He was living in Washington at the time, and he and his friends were really big stargazers. One Thanksgiving, he got invited to stay with his friend's family. So they all went out to go do some stargazing, went out to a big field of knee-high grass, and were staring up at what they thought was a bunch of shooting stars. The original poster asked his friend what the light was, but he said he had no idea. The light was bobbing around, bouncing wildly in the sky like a pinball. Then all of a sudden, it fizzled out. Puzzled, but not disturbed, the friends continued on with their night, walking through the field, wondering what they'd seen, even joking that maybe it was a UFO, but assuming it must have been a drone or something. And then it gets weird. They came across a young man standing alone in the field. They were the only people there for miles around, and the poster said he would have been able to see him from where he was. So he said it was almost as if he appeared in front of them. He was wearing only ratty jeans and nothing else. It was the middle of November, so the attire was particularly odd. Now the friends were scared to approach him, but OP felt necessary to go forward. He said he didn't sound drunk, but that he did seem visibly stirred. He asked the strange man what had happened, and he said he did not want to talk about it, but he needed to be examined at a hospital immediately. The Redditor gave the man his jacket and saw him into an ambulance, where he was then taken off to a hospital. What happened? Was this man an abductee who'd been dropped off? Was the light they saw flooding around him being beamed down? We may never know. Number 3, the 1979 Spain sighting. Another Reddit thread asking a similar question asked users to share their stories of famous UFO and alien sightings from their country, bringing us this story from Spain that took place in November 1979. A plane took off from Mallorca, coming from Austria and heading to Tenerife. Not long after, it found red lights in the sky hovering ahead of it. Now, initially the pilots assumed it was just another plane. The flight crew tried to signal over the radio to find out what was on their flight path, but neither the air traffic controller in Barcelona nor the military radar had any idea what it was they had encountered, as nothing else should have been sharing the airspace with them at this time. The plane ascended, hoping to avoid the flight path of the UFO and to try and get a look to ascertain just what they were flying up with. The UFO kept getting closer and closer, so the pilots did an emergency landing in Valencia. The UFO had a similar idea and followed them around till it landed. The original plane's radar started to pick up 3 objects flying behind them. The military had sent out 2 planes to try and assess and contain the situation. They found a giant red light floating statically over the airport, even though it wasn't being picked up on by the radar. The light started to fly when they got closer as they attempted to chase it, soaring around, tailing the mysterious floating light for upwards of 2 hours, intermittently losing sight of the target completely, occasionally getting blips on the radar, until eventually the trail went cold, and as quickly as it had appeared, the strange light had disappeared. People on the ground reported seeing that light all over that day, and to date, no one truly knows what had happened. Number 2, the Travis Walton incident. Now, our next story is a wild one even by top 5 standards, but that's exactly why I wanted to include it. Our story starts in November 1975, and I'm pretty sure that's the 3rd one of these that took place in November. It's a weird month for aliens, huh? Travis Walton was working as a forester, and the day was passing normally. Walton and his co-workers from the logging crew were riding in a truck, 7 men total, when they encountered a flying saucer-like object hovering above them around 100 feet in the air, making a loud, high-pitched droning noise. The truck stopped, and Walton left the vehicle to get a closer look at the unidentified flying object. And suddenly, a bright light surrounded the truck and knocked Walton back and unconscious. Terrified, the other men drove off. Walton then goes on to claim that when he awoke, he was no longer in the forest on the ground, but was in a bright, silvery, hospital-like room being observed by 3 short, bald creatures, very similar to the Allagash abduction story. He says that he struggled as much as he could against his captors until he was met with a tall creature that closely resembled a human, but was wearing an intimidating helmet. The masked creature escorted Walton to another room and put a translucent mask over his face, and he blacked out. Walton says the next thing he can accurately remember is walking alongside a highway 5 days later. The thing is, Walton really was missing for 5 days. There was a search. Scent dogs and helicopters were used to track him over the woods, and he was assumed to have passed. For 5 full days, he was completely untraceable until one day he just reappeared. Since that fateful week in 1975, Travis has sworn that what happened to him was an abduction, even if it just seemed like a bad dream. His story served as the basis for the 90s horror film Fire Fell from the Sky, so if you're looking for a dramatization of this story, good one to check out. And number 1, the Rendlesham Incident. It's sometimes referred to as Great Britain's Roswell. The Rendlesham Incident is a very noticeable case in UFO sighting history. On December 26, 1980, there was a series of vivid, bright flashing lights flying over Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. 2 US Army personnel, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston, were stationed at local Air Force bases and were alerted by these strange lights, worrying that it could have been a threat. The younger of the 2 men, Mr. Burroughs, said that the lights looked like a beacon flashing all sorts of colors. Over 40 personnel stationed at the Air Force base corroborated this claim. The 2 men got clearance to investigate whatever was flashing over Rendlesham Forest. In their official document to their superiors, the 2 men write that they saw a strange, glowing, metallic triangular object hanging in the sky, pulsing with colored lights. Neither of the men had any idea what it was they were witnessing. The craft seemed far more advanced than anything either of them had ever seen, and seemed not of this world. As if that wasn't compelling evidence enough, neighboring farm animals were all in a frenzy as this thing was flying, and the airmen's equipment started malfunctioning. The personnel could no longer use their radio to contact the base. Landing in the middle of the clearing in the forest was a craft unlike either of them had ever seen. It was black, triangular, and made out of smooth, opaque glass. No windows or landing gear. It didn't look like anything either of these trained servicemen had ever seen. Peniston describes there being hieroglyphic-like symbols etched onto the shell of the vessel, although they were far too cryptic for him to understand. The craft took off, changing the lives of those men together. And it wouldn't even be the last sighting of the Rendlesham UFO, because not even 2 days later, the same strange lights were seen flying overhead the forest again. This time, coming prepared, crews set out with Geiger counters to follow up on whatever was flying around them. The patrol found their way to the landing site Peniston and Burroughs had described and found several depressions in the ground, all setting off the Geiger counter for radioactivity. And lo and behold, above them was those same flashing lights that had been taunting them 2 nights before, disappearing into the skies. 40 years later, and we're still no closer to understanding what happened in the Rendlesham incident. Number 5. The Roswell Autopsy. Perhaps one of the most famous pieces of lost alien footage is the infamous Roswell Autopsy tape. Maybe you've heard of it. If you're a UFO enthusiast like me, no doubt it's come up before at some point. Roswell was kind of the birthplace of UFO mania, where a lot of the first conspiracy theories and a lot of the public ideas we have about aliens really stem from. If you don't know somehow, the story goes that an alien craft crashed landed in Roswell, New Mexico, where it was swiftly apprehended by shadowy government agents looking to pull a curtain over the whole thing. Reverse engineered, studied, down to the pilot of the craft, recovered by FBI scientists. Almost immediately after, hushed whispers and rumors of a recorded alien autopsy set conspiracists and enthusiasts' mind ablaze in equal measures. Recorded footage of an alien body being dissected would be undeniable proof with world-shattering consequences, and would probably make for some pretty good ratings. Well, the Fox Network would agree with you, because in 1995, the footage was broadcasted on Fox, presented by legendary thespian and #1 guy to trust in regards to human-alien relations, one Jonathan Frakes. The film broadcast was not the true footage of the autopsy, but rather a high-budget recreation to show for a wider public audience what had happened. The director claims he had seen the original footage from the 1947 autopsy, but couldn't release it. He claims that he spliced shots from the original footage into the faked footage to provide some clarity, but didn't tell us what was real and what wasn't. And he insists that the video wasn't faked, but rather a reconstruction for educational purposes. Now, despite only being a reenactment, the special effects of the footage are remarkable. It does look pretty believable. It was helmed by industry legend Stan Winston, the special effects warlock responsible for bringing the Predator and the aliens alike. The alien body in the footage was filled with sheep guts, chicken entrails, pig knuckles, and raspberry jam to create the illusion of an alien filled to bursting with foreign organs, and probably tasted halfway decent with a little bit of soy sauce. So was the footage ever actually real, or was it all just cooked up to sweep up viewers on a dwindling TV season? The director maintains always that what he saw was real, he just wasn't allowed to show it, and did his best to show us what happened. There's an interesting discussion to be had there, I think. Was he just showing how easy it is to fraud something, manipulate people into believing whatever they see? Who's to say if the true footage ever did come out, we would even believe it? We would probably just dismiss it the exact same way. But if you want to see way more scary footage, real or not, dismissible or provable, we have got loads and loads of that for you to enjoy. So click through, stay a while, and get scared all night long with Top 5 Scary. I'll be here the whole night and in this building. Number 4. Edgar Mitchell. The thing about most alien sightings is that they don't always come from the most reputable of sources. You know, it's usually a random internet post, maybe a blurry shot from an iPhone kind of thing, posted on Reddit with a caption like, "What is this?" Or, you know, it's somebody who was walking home late at night and saw some lights in the sky and didn't know it was a plane. And while I think we should respect the voice of the people and the common man, it'd be nice if we got someone with a little bit of clout to their name. Well, luckily we've got more than a few astronauts who've seen bizarre things up there and are willing to share their stories. Edgar Mitchell is one such man. He's stood on the face of the moon before, he helped save the Apollo 14 mission from becoming a disaster, he's the 6th man to ever walk on the moon, and he is a lifelong defender and believer in aliens and UFOs. Mitchell claims that he's seen things that prove existence of life outside the planet. First and foremost, he is a firm believer of the Roswell conspiracy, and he insists that all those stories are true and that the military has been hiding the truth behind what happened at Roswell for decades, adding on to say that it was buried, and the military propagated a covert movement to discredit everything that had happened at Roswell, to deter people from taking any news about UFOs and flying saucers seriously, dismissing it forever as tinfoil hat stuff. Mitchell claims that NASA believes the public wouldn't be able to handle the truth. Come on! We're ready. We're ready, we're all ready, we're big enough now to know the truth. It's like the tooth fairy, we're grown up, we know where the quarters are coming from, just tell us. And Edgar Mitchell's been trying to just tell us. In 2004, Edgar Mitchell told a Florida newspaper that he knew there was a secret cabal inside the American government that took in and studied alien corpses, and that after JFK was removed from office, the group did not answer to the president and didn't include the commander-in-chief in their briefings. He was quoted saying, "They all know that UFOs are real. The question is where they are coming from. A shadowy organization existing outside the president's control with insider knowledge on aliens and trying to suppress the public." Did Mr. Mitchell just casually confirm the Men in Black are real? Now, NASA themselves obviously denied all of Mitchell's statements, but obviously they would. What government is going to throw their hands up and admit that they have been slicing up alien bodies on the side? Number 3, the first flying saucer. Now, while the Roswell, New Mexico incident was the UFO sighting that really shot alien sightings into the mainstream public consciousness and kind of defined what alien sightings look like, you know, the idea of little gray or green men and flying saucers, it was obviously far from the first alien sighting ever recorded, just kind of the most popular. But not even a few weeks earlier, there was actually another famous sighting, and one that's thought to be the progenitor for sightings of UFOs being thought of as flying saucers. Kenneth Arnold was an American aviator. Unlike most UFO sightings, Kenneth never changed his story once, never made any kind of surrealist, outrageous claims, and stuck to the same story for the rest of his life. He saw weird saucers in the air he couldn't explain. Well, let's take a listen. It was 1947, June the 24th, weeks before Roswell, which occurred in July 1947. Mr. Arnold was flying his private plane over Washington by Mount Rainier. I've never been to Washington, so you guys gotta forgive me. He was looking for a recently downed transport plane that had a $5,000 bounty the US military was offering in exchange for its finding. As he was approaching the summit, Arnold noticed that he saw 9 blinding flashes of light hovering up above. When looking in closer, they resembled ships but looked like discs. Arnold said that he saw them flying in a bizarre pattern, with each position diagonally together, reporting that it reminded him of the tail of a kite. Arnold was an aviation expert and said that the craft seemed far more advanced than anything human beings were capable of at the time, moving at unbelievable speeds. He landed at a nearby airport and told crew that he saw something bizarre he couldn't rationalize, worried that perhaps it could have been missiles being fired at Washington. Reporters interviewed him and he was pressed for several questions, but no one could corroborate or figure out just exactly what it was he had seen. Arnold was questioned by the Army as well, who took his claims remarkably seriously, as he was a fairly respected and reputable man, and there wasn't really the same culture surrounding aliens and UFOs, and as such, his claim was met with genuine worry. No one ever figured it out, but the story of them being saucers, combined with the saucers seen in New Mexico, led to the public perception of UFOs picturing them as saucers for the better part of 60 years, pretty much to this day. Number 2, the Travis Walton abduction. Now, abduction stories can sometimes be a little much to believe, even for those with the most open minds who want to believe. You know, they all seem kind of the same. It's somebody you maybe can't trust driving home late at night, saw something strange, they woke up in a blinding light room and they got poked and prodded by little gray men. Well, Travis Walton's story is not dissimilar to that. It's pretty out there even by abduction standards, but it's too juicy to pass up, so pop open those ears. In 1975, Travis Walton was working as a logger and was facing a fairly routine day, 6 other loggers and him driving around in the forest, when they saw something incredibly bright shining at them through the treetops. One of the men claimed it looked like a flattened disc, a saucer of sorts even. Walton stepped out of the bed of the truck to investigate and was struck by some invisible force that knocked him backwards. The rest of the crew panicked and drove away. Huge faux pas, I'll say, leaving your coworker behind after being struck by an alien, but okay, you think you know somebody. When the crew returned, Walton had vanished. Walton awoke and had thought that he'd been taken to a hospital because he'd found himself in a blindingly bright room and could hear people moving around him. But it wasn't until he got a good look at his doctors that he knew something was amiss. 3 feet tall, with brown, quarter-sized pupils, with marshmallow-like skin. Walton freaked out, obviously, as one would probably do, and was swiftly restrained by his captors. He tried to fight them off, but was greeted by a tall creature he said resembled a humanoid, but was masked by an intimidating helmet, a kind of Darth Vader looking thing. The masked creature took Walton and escorted him back into the operating room and put a translucent mask over his face. And Walton drifted out of consciousness again, unsure if anything was real. The next thing he remembers is walking alongside a highway as if nothing had ever happened. He eventually finds his way to a phone and called his brother-in-law, who panically asked what had happened. It turned out that Walton had been gone for 5 days, and he was untraceable. Search parties had formed looking for him, sent dogs and choppers, tracked him from the woods, but no one could find any sign of him, as if he'd blinked out of existence and then blinked right back. Travis swore what happened to him was real, a real abduction, and he's maintained that story ever since that fateful week in 1975. Now, if you think this story is fascinating and you're upset that nobody recorded any of it and there wasn't any footage of what Travis described, well, the tragic news is, yeah, it doesn't exist. You can, however, watch a 90s sci-fi movie that is directly based off Travis's case called Fire in the Sky. I've never seen it, but I'm sure it's on Amazon Prime or something. It's got Robert Patrick from Terminator 2. He's in it. He's a good actor. Yeah, check it out. And number 1, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. The incident and conspiracy at Roswell, New Mexico is one of the most famous events in UFO culture. This incident is considered England's Roswell, the Rendlesham Forest Incident. Few other alien sightings can boast this many government witnesses, memos, and strange proof. Let's paint the scene. It was December 26, 1980. Oh, nice and festive and Christmas themed. Surrounding Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England was a series of Air Force bases and US Army personnel. Two of these stationed officers were John Burroughs and Jim Peniston. On this fateful night, the two of them were concerned by shining bright lights that were seen flying above the base, worrying that it could perhaps have been a threat or a spy plane scouting out their location. Burroughs said that he thought the lights looked like a beacon summoning people over, and over 40 people on the base all agreed, reporting seeing the lights and sharing their concern. So the two men were sent over to Rendlesham Forest to investigate. In their official document, the two men claimed that they had seen a strange, shining, triangular object that was pulsing with colored lights. Neither of the men recognized it as an aircraft from any military across the globe. The craft had seemed far too advanced for anything of this world. Black and made out of a smooth, opaque glass. It didn't appear to have any wings or landing gear or even really any methods of propulsion or exhaust. The men describe it as covered in hieroglyphic-like symbols etched onto the hull of the vessel all over. Neither of the men could identify the glyphs as anything they'd seen before. Duh, it's alien stuff. As the craft touched down, nearby animals were being driven into a frenzy, and the airmen's equipment started malfunctioning, communications equipment cutting out. The two personnel could no longer call back to the base. Now, not even 2 days later, the Rendlesham UFO was spotted again. 2 days later, the same strange lights were seen hovering above the bases surrounding Rendlesham. This time, the crews came significantly more prepared, waiting and ready for the UFO to make contact. The patrol group had found depressions in the ground, and their Geiger counters started blowing up with noise. And the group had known that they'd come across where the UFO had been. And then, right on time, the patrol saw the same craft flying above overhead, disappearing into the night. Years passed, and we're still no closer to understanding just what occurred those fateful sightings. And we may never know.